Amitabha. Born in a refugee camp in Gaza in 1955, Izzeldin Abuelaish was the oldest of nine children. The basic necessities for a secure life, food, water, shelter, employment, were always in short supply. It was a hard life for the impoverished family that was struggling like so many others in the camp. One thing not in short supply, however, was his parents, especially his mother's, determination that he get an education. Fortunately, Izzeldin loved learning and appreciated that education was a privilege, not something to be taken lightly. He realized that it would provide his only hope, the only means of escape from a life of constant exhaustion and numbing disappointment. With encouragement from various teachers, and thanks to his own efforts, Izzeldin excelled at his studies. At the same time, when not studying or at school, he took whatever work he could find to help provide for the family. It was a responsibility this oldest son took very seriously, even at an early age when he was just starting school. After finishing high school, his exceptional capabilities earned him a rare chance to study outside of Gaza. In his case, at a medical school in Cairo. Izzeldin would then continue his medical and related studies at several universities in other countries, including Harvard. These are extraordinary accomplishments for someone who had grown up in a refugee camp in Gaza. Later, as he became the first Palestinian doctor at an Israeli hospital, Izzeldin was convinced that medical care providers were ideally placed to bridge the differences between diverse populations. Having taken an oath to help, doctors paid no heed to a patient's nationality or religion. What of patients? For their part, when overwhelmed with pain or facing imminent death, how many would choose to reject a doctor's help because they were of a different ethnicity or religion? The desire to help and the desire to be helped. These have the ability to break through man-made divisions. In 2008, Izzeldin was offered a position at a hospital in Canada. A few months before, his wife had died unexpectedly. It was due to her ongoing support and knowing that the children would be well cared for that he was able to study abroad and later work in Israel. Now, without her steadying presence, the family felt adrift. Believing the proposed relocation might be a good change for his 8 children, Izzeldin discussed it with them, and they agreed on the move. But a few months later, tragedy again struck. In 2009, during the Gaza war that started in December 2008, 3 of his daughters and a niece were killed when an Israeli tank fired into the family's house, turning the home filled with children and their fathers into a scene of carnage. Izzeldin frantically tried to think of anyone who could help his family members who were still alive, but seriously injured. He telephoned a good friend, an Israeli television broadcaster, who made the highly unusual decision to take the call while on the air. Excusing himself from the broadcast, he managed to arrange for the surviving two children and one of the adults to be transported from Gaza to the hospital in Israel where Izzeldin worked. Due to the dedicated care and support the three received during the following weeks and months, they survived their injuries. Izzeldin was asked afterward whether he now hated the Israelis. He asked, which ones? The hospital staff he worked with daily, the doctors and medical personnel who did everything they could to save his family members' lives, the babies he had helped over the years, perhaps the Israeli family he had worked for and lived with one summer years ago, and who had treated him like one of the family, or the soldier who fired the shells into the third floor bedroom where his three children were. This soldier was already living with the realization of what he had done. One day, he too might have children and understand how precious the life of one's child is. So, which Israelis was he supposed to hate? Izzeldin had long felt that revenge and counter-revenge are suicidal, that mutual respect, equality, and coexistence are the reasonable way forward. End quote. After the family emigrated to Canada, the children quickly adjusted to their new lives. Izzeldin quickly found living in Canada all he had hoped for. When his two children, his two older daughters, were young, they had attended a peace camp in the United States. There, they saw that stereotypes could quickly dissolve when people were willing to let go of prejudice born of ignorance and the lack of meaningful contact with others. Their early experiences in the United States were reinforced in their new country they called home. They also felt welcomed at a large co-ed multicultural university there. The three younger children also thrived in Canada, in their new environment of hope and opportunity, friendship, and inclusion. As a doctor, Izzeldin viewed hate as a chronic disease. Today, as we are painfully aware, this deadly disease is continuing to spread. Its underlying condition is ignorance. The treatment? Hope. Our all too common response? Retaliation and war. In a war, bad decisions are made innocently and intentionally. Struggling later to understand how such things happened, we may cast about for the reasons. But with our faulty memory, inadequate knowledge, and grudging understanding, we cannot know the actual cause of any conflict. When we say that this was the cause, others can point to an earlier event and say, no, that was the cause. And so, those with opposing viewpoints can end up mentally wending their way back through current events recent history, and even to ancient times. But the cause goes so much farther back. And even if we could go back innumerable lifetimes to that very first flicker of an unintentional offense, that initial cause, what would be the point? Busily casting blame due to past actions will have us stuck in the past. Wouldn't it be more productive to just accept the reality that we cannot change what has already happened, and then look to the present to consider what we can do for the future? Wiser to not get caught up in what if and if only. Better to acknowledge that as imperfect beings, we have all made mistakes. Who among us never had a thought of ill will, never unfairly criticized another? Who can say they never gave in to anger? Isn't it wiser to realize that our future lies in hope, the hope that we can do better? Izzeldin wrote a book titled I Shall Not Hate, a book that talks about the future in light of a tragic past. In his case, his daughter's death. This line stands out, quote, "There is hope. The past is only there to learn from," end quote. Hope is forward thinking. Without it, difficulties can become insurmountable obstacles. With it, we can open the door to the possibility of better outcomes. If we cannot yet build hope on forgiveness, we can build it on understanding that if we choose to remain trapped in the past, there will be no genuine hope for a better future. And so we aspire to learn from our past. We're not dismissing it and saying it no longer matters. We acknowledge and accept that the painful events happened. And it is precisely because of that very pain that similar events must not be repeated. Every time that memory resurfaces, instead of suffering anew, we need to free ourselves from it. Freedom comes from the determination to give rise to hope and to bring this hope to life. Izzeldin provided an inspiring example of how to do this. To memorialize his three daughters who died, he established a foundation to provide scholarships and fellowships to young women in the Middle East, honoring his daughters' lives thus. His thought was to empower the lives of other young women in the hope that they could go on to achieve what his daughters did not have the chance to. Through establishing the foundation, he chose to transform what was broken into what is good, to transform grief into hope. Another example of learning from past pain and working toward a more hopeful outcome was provided in Molding an Inner Life. We learned how Eddie Illison prepared herself for what was surely to come for the remaining Jews in Nazi-controlled Netherlands. Refusing to give in to fear and hate, Eddie hoped others could similarly let go of these crippling emotions. Of the Jews she worked alongside, she wrote of, quote, "The deadly fear I saw in all those faces. I hope to be a center of peace," end quote. Personal experience led her to conclude that intense suffering develops in an absence of inner preparation. Refusing to give in to fear and hate, she delved deep within herself to find an inner sanctuary of calm abiding. She strove to courageously, even joyously, face the impending reality from this personal refuge. She hoped to help the Jews around her by being a center of peace for them. When that which threatens to destroy is understood and faced, its power weakens. The outcome still looms, but its ability to terrify is reduced. The deeper one's understanding, the less threatening the terror. Instead of succumbing to personal desperation and loss, both Izzeldin and Eddie hoped to help others. Izzeldin established a foundation to fund scholarships for the education of young women. Eddie hoped a source of peace became a source of peace and tranquility for those justifiably terrified. Both championed hope. Hope enables us to move forward and not give in to fear, hate, or despair. Hope enables us to not give up on what we know is right, even in the face of resistance. It empowers us to bear current hardships as we conceive of a more promising future. It helps us to look forward, not with expectations, but with aspirations. It gets us out of the bed in the morning and keeps us going when nothing is going our way. Intermingled with compassion, understanding, and respect, hope can plant and nurture the seeds for a better future. Supported by acceptance and patience, hope can enable us to see society not as a fractured assemblage of disparate people, but as beings who belong to one immense family. With hope, the present can become more bearable, and the future that seemed impossible can be achieved. Amitofo.